Spurgeon here to welcome you to Season 2.
Nailed it.
I know, thank you. That's it, cut. Spurgeon here to welcome you to the...
This is what I do sometimes. It just keeps getting worse. Like fewer and fewer words until you...
It's like me with bowling, man.
Duh. He's got it, Chase. We got this. We're good.
And I'm going to say motorcycle.
Motorcycles.
Motorcycle, man. I just
You
want.
cursed again.
I don't want a pickle.
I just want to ride my motorcycle.
Spurgeon here to welcome you to the season finale of High Side, Low Side. Season 2 has been quite eventful for us. We've introduced special guests. We've introduced comments from readers. Lemmy said his farewell. And two of the special guests we have here right now. On my left-hand side, I've got Ari Henning.
Hey, guys.
And I've got Zack Quartz.
Ew.
And you, of course, know our buddy Bearded Joe over here.
What's up?
And when we talk about some of the special guests, Ari and Zack have been on previous episodes hosting, as well as they've been interviews on the podcast.
Yeah, like Spurgy said, just go to wherever you find your podcast. Usually type in RevZilla, and you'll find High Side, Low Side, where we, after we shut off the cameras, we turn on the mics, and we just keep going on and on about all the random comments that we find about, on the YouTube videos and on Common Tread and things like that, and also interviews with great guys like this. So it's really interesting, extra stuff for you to check out.
Yeah, if you get lucky, we'll pull one of your comments, we'll talk about you, and we'll embarrass the hell out of you. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Now, gentlemen, we left off at the end of Season 1 with a episode finale saying, motorcycle sales suck, do you even care?
Provocative. I was there.
Yeah, you were there, Joe.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
What we want to dive into today is, what does motorcycling need to move forward? What do we need to kick this into high gear and actually start selling some units, getting more people involved?
Units.
And we're going to go through and we're going to have a nice, lively discussion. It is the season finale, so you're already starting with the jokes, man. You're like, just come on.
I think you should
Random words that you want to repeat.
I think you should start by not calling motorcycles units.
But they're unit
They're-
sales.
Did I say units?
You did.
I thought you said
The industry
Unix.
talks about it.
Oh, sorry.
Whatever. We
like
know
a
you're
house servant.
I apologize. Then thank you for calling me out. So what do we need to happen in motorcycling to have it make a comeback, right? What do we need to get people interested? And the first question I want to kick off is, what states or what countries are doing a good job integrating motorcycles into their culture?
Yeah, sure.
Now, you guys obviously have traveled all around the globe riding
have.
motorcycles. So
we also intentionally moved to a place for motorcycles.
Yes.
what would that place be?
California.
Oh.
That's got a lot
heard
going
of it.
on.
Yeah, California has a lot going on. It has, lane sharing being legal. It has good weather, which is a lot of the reason that motorcyclists move there, right? Is because you can ride year round. But I think that they've done a lot to embrace motorcycles in general. People are
when you say lane sharing, you talking about like lane splitting?
Yep.
Yeah, we
lane
prefer
sharing. Lane sharing is the technical.
We
legal
prefer
term.
the term lane sharing.
Okay.
Because we're sharing.
inclusive.
Friendly.
Yeah,
Sharing is
exactly.
We're not
caring.
trying to be divisive here.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
We're trying to
Sharing
share.
That
is
Toyota
caring.
Camry and myself were together.
Exactly. We're coexisting.
So
in the
yeah,
same lane.
California does a good job because they allow that. It's the only state that does it so far. But like in terms of countries, I mean, you go anywhere in Southeast Asia or Europe, and I mean, I don't know if it's allowed or condoned, but people are parking on curbs. People are parking everywhere. There's all the motorcycles are going up to the front of the light. There's a lot of other places that just embrace it or allow it. Maybe just let them get away with more.
Yeah, first of all, traffic is less important to you, right? You don't have to worry as much about a traffic jam because you can go through it safely, of course. But I also think that it helps people understand and interact with motorcyclists on a regular basis, right? You have to coexist more or less on the road rather than each person being in or on a different vehicle, which I think makes a difference when it comes to sort of the diplomacy of motorcycling in general.
And it sort of becomes a necessity as traffic gets more congested and more people are living in urban areas, where it's just like, if you're going to get someplace, you're going to have to filter through traffic. So if it's allowed, if it's legalized, if there's actual rules and people are respectful about the way they do it, it can be a really efficient way of alleviating traffic.
So in addition, what are you laughing at?
I was just thinking about the time, this is another little Zito story, where traffic was backed up so bad. I live in New Jersey. We work here in Philadelphia, so I just have, most of my commute is just a bridge. So there's some, I don't know, a ladder was across the bridge or something, and traffic was just stacked up. And I was on my 67 BSA that was quickly overheating sitting in traffic. So I shut the bike down, and I'm sitting there roasting because the bike is hot, and I'm between cars and everything. So I started just pushing the bike between the parked cars on the bridge, figuring, well, I'll just walk to work with my motorcycle across the bridge. And a cop freaks out. He's sirens, all this, jumps out, starts yelling at me because I was passing cars on foot pushing my motorcycle that was turned off.
Not even sitting on the bike, just
Not
like
even
standing next to it.
yeah,
Did he give
just
you a
pushing
ticket?
it. No, he just hollered at me and told me to get back in line.
What?
And it was because everyone was getting so mad that I was walking.
So that's
through
the
traffic.
mentality that needs to
Yeah.
shift in order to
Exactly.
get motorcycles to
Right.
be more accepted and to get that behavior and that practice to be accepted, and then
Yeah.
everyone can be happier.
When it rains, Mr. Officer, Joe Zito gets wet.
Yeah.
Right. There's a
So
trade-off.
should he not be able to go to the front of the line?
But I think you make a good point, because it's not about changing the perception of motorcyclists. It's about changing the perception of the people in the cars, because
Yeah.
there
Yes.
it wasn't a bunch of motorcyclists that were angry with Joe. It was a bunch of people in the cars that were sitting
Yeah.
there and they were frustrated
But we
that they
don't all
couldn't
work
push
at
their
RevZilla.
cars up.
It's not like they were going to get to RevZilla before me. Like I was the only one going there. You know, like
But I think it's more about just when you think about lane splitting in general, when you think about that specific, example of where that is a cultural difference, I can't imagine in Philadelphia everybody gets so angry. We have some pretty angry drivers here.
Yeah.
So as soon as you start to lane split, because they're not thinking about it, they don't know that it's a thing.
Yep.
They automatically are like just so furious that
Right.
you're
Yeah,
doing
they feel
that.
violated.
Yeah.
There is a learning curve. Like having lived in California for over a decade now, it was different before than it is
Yeah,
now.
totally.
Now it's extremely symbiotic. Cars move over for you. Motorcyclists wave. Like there's a lot of respect going on. It's different than it used to be, where people would sometimes like throw a coffee cup at you or move over to try and block you.
Yeah. Yep.
So there's certainly a learning curve. If you were to introduce it in
Yeah.
Philadelphia, I think there would be a lot of problems before it got better.
Yeah.
It's a lot for people to take on.
I
at
noticed
once.
that just like I had ridden to California maybe in 2010, and it was pretty crazy traffic. I don't remember anyone being remarkably nice or anything about it, but we were just there in April, and we were on the FTR. We were up by Lake Arrowhead, and it was beautiful mountain road, San Bernardino Mountains, and like they would notice that there was a motorcycle behind them going up the
they'd
mountain.
move over,
And
yeah.
they were like, "Oh, enjoy the mountain. Have a
Yep.
nice day." And they wait, and I was just like, "What is this world?" I felt like I was dreaming. It was insane.
So that encourages people to get involved. I mean,
Yeah.
they can see that they can
Yep.
get through traffic or enjoy a twisted road.
Quick
no, go for it.
quick fun fact. That is why lane splitting is legal in California, because Highway Patrol was using motorcycles.
Overheating, yeah, air-cooled Harleys.
Old air-cooled bikes that were overheating, so they're like, we need to go through traffic because it's too darn hot to do this. And then, of course, everyone was like, well, that's what we'll do too. So it's sort of grandfathered in, but it's become a big part of motorcycling culture, and it's definitely a place where I think, now, as Ari points out, now it has become welcome for people to do that, and it helps.
So moving beyond lane splitting, is there anything else that sticks out as something that, if you have seen it happen in a certain state or a certain city or one of the countries that you visited, that you think would be another part of this as far as like getting people into motorcycling, or at least becoming more accepting, or at least maybe just saying like, hey, I like that person can do that.
it's
That would make my life
it's
easier. I would do
conveniences.
that.
Like we both rode to fly here out of LAX. We both rode our motorcycles. We were able to split lanes through traffic at LAX, which is hellacious, and then park directly across from the terminal for free.
Oh, that's
and then-
right, because you have free motorcycle parking
And
in
then
LAX,
walk in.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like
Wow.
that sort of convenience
That is
encourages people, because like, you tell people about it, or they see it and they're like, oh, well, I got to get on a motorcycle to do that. So even if it's not like they're not doing it because they're passionate about riding bikes yet, they're doing it because it allows them to. Just like a lot of people get hybrids so they can use the HOV lane, which is
Yeah.
another thing you can do in California
On a
on
bike.
two wheels. California's
Yeah.
the greatest.
Can you can you not do that here? HOV lane, like carpool lane?
We don't have car, like, so, I mean, there's,
can.
They're
you
behind
you
the times.
can.
They're still burning coal and stuff. It's weird here.
You can.
No, like,
there's
you can-
some areas that
it's
they
some
allow
areas
bike.
you can do the carpool. If there is a carpool lane, usually motorcycles will
On
will be allowed.
95, I think last time I remember coming back from Virginia, you can up 95, the
So
HOV
like
line.
free parking, HOV lane, maybe like reduce tolls for motorcycles, because that always pisses us off.
Dude.
Well,
if it's
so-
done by the axle,
Don't even get me started on tolls,
Yeah.
man.
What accent was that? You were like, I don't know if it was like
Frustrated.
Jersey or something like, yeah, it was
Maybe
coming
that's-
out of
he's just
nowhere.
Maybe
angry.
that's rural.
Don't
Vermont.
even
Vermont.
tell me about that. Oh man.
That really that for me personally was one of the ones that really bummed me out, because I basically have always lived in New Jersey and somehow worked in Philadelphia. So I had been crossing bridges on my motorcycles for years now, and the bridge toll used to be just $2 for a motorcycle. And that was awesome, and I could park on the sidewalk when I got to work. It was
As
no big
opposed to
deal.
what for cars?
It was $4 for cars.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Now we're talking.
But they just a couple years ago boosted the toll up to $5 for cars and also motorcycles. So the toll went from $2 to $5 for a bike.
That's
ridiculous.
crazy.
So,
Yeah.
dude, what a drag.
Well, so you guys are mentioning tolls, but the one thing that keeps coming back to me is national parks. So I remember the last time I went down to Skyline Drive in Virginia, it was the same
$15 or $20,
price.
right?
So it was like, $15 I think to get in on a car, and the car has 5 people in it, or it's $15 for a motorcycle, and you have 5 people on 5 motorcycles, and they each have to pay.
It's punishment.
Yeah.
You're being punished.
I think they're trying to discourage bikes from going through there.
I mean, it's not actually. I'm sure there aren't people in charge of national parks that want to punish motorcyclists, but if there were, this is how they would do it.
Well, I think they're
I think
discouraging
Joe makes
it.
a good point
Yeah,
about
they're discouraging
discouraging
it
it.
because last time, one of the last times I had my 70 Triumph down there that has drum brakes and no suspension, all this stuff.
Do you have any new bikes?
I do have a couple new bikes, but I got pulled over down there because the guy got me going 40 and a 35 or something like that. Meanwhile, there's
daredevil.
like R6s and Gixxers and all these crazy ass bikes going by 100 miles
They're
an hour.
going so fast you can't see them.
Right. So I was like an easy
That was
target.
Ari and Zack passed him.
Yeah. I was an easy target, but I think a lot of those places are trying to discourage bikes from coming through there because people get all twisted up because they're driving
'cause
through in their
they're loud
Winnebagos
or-
and campers, and and a guy comes by on a bike and
Yeah,
just bums
that's a fair
everybody
point.
out.
But I think in doing things to encourage, like that would help the motorcycle industry. If the municipalities are doing more things to get people on bikes.
And parking is another one, I think. Like there are places in downtown San Francisco. When I moved there, I just couldn't believe. I moved from Boston to San Francisco, and I couldn't believe there was an entire city block
Just
of
bikes lined up.
just of
Yeah.
bikes and meters.
It also looks awesome. It's encouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing that you guys haven't mentioned, because we talked about international, and this is something that's not necessarily as transparent for the non-motorcycling community, but one of the things I think would help the motorcycling community that's adapted in foreign countries is a tiered licensing system. Because one of the problems that we have here is folks that get into motorcycling that are young, they buy something that's way too big, it intimidates them, it
Very
scares
common.
them,
Yep.
they don't ride it, and then they eventually just fade
They're
away
scared
from
off
it.
of bikes.
Right.
Yeah, so I think, and we did an article on this for Common Tread, and there was a lot of controversy about implementing something like this in America, but I think if we're all realistic with ourselves, a tiered licensing system for like a 16-year-old getting onto you can't go higher than a 250
150 or
cc
250,
or
yeah.
something like that. Like,
I'm
I think-
surprised that you would support that. You're usually don't ever take any of my freedoms away or I'll chew your face off.
I have my limits, but I think
It's the long goal that you're going
It's the long goal. And I
Long
think in
term,
this
it's a good
one-
idea.
Right.
Yeah, and I think in this one, like honestly, like a modern Ninja 400 makes enough power to make any of us sitting here on the couch
yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you're saying like, listen, a new rider until they're 18 years old can't go higher than a Z400 or a Ninja 400, like that's a great bike for them.
It's a recipe for long-term success, and that it keeps
Right.
people from getting it forces them to learn the skills and to get comfortable and learn the rules of the road without having like all this crazy horsepower that's going to splatter them against a guardrail before they know what happened.
Right.
yeah,
And
totally,
I think
totally true.
In America, people are going to get pissed off because they want their Hayabusa when they turn 16 or their S1000 RR because you got to have 200 horsepower.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have 200 horsepower, how are you supposed to go fast?
Then you're
Right.
a wuss.
Yeah, how could you even
so
go
so
anywhere?
off the bat, it might dissuade some people because like, oh, I got to start on a 250, like that's lame, I don't want to do that, and they're just going to go buy like a lifted truck or something. But but long term, if they go through that process, I think it's setting up it's more success for the riders.
Yeah.
I think the way to do it would be to allow, and I believe this is the case in some European countries, maybe all of them even, what do I know? That you can start young. So in the US, it's 16 is sort of the basement for a driver's license, right? But they can start at 14 or something like that with a 150.
That's a
or
great idea.
a
Yeah, I
7.
love
So
that.
Because then you're giving them freedom, and their only way to get it is to be
Yeah.
on 2 wheels. And then we
Exactly.
all know that once you ride a motorcycle, you're going to want to ride for the rest of your life.
And
So-
honestly, if I was 14 years old and I could ride a Honda Metropolitan 50 around,
or a
heck,
bicycle,
yeah.
You'd be like, give me that
Yeah.
scooter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
totally.
In New,
Totally.
Jer- in New
Those might be
Jersey, you could
choices,
get
yeah.
you could get a moped license in New Jersey. I think at 15,
14 or 15, yeah, same thing in
15, yeah.
Massachusetts.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
so-
that's a great one to add to the list. Like
Yeah.
make it so you can get a license earlier, but it has to be on a small displacement.
So basically, what we're talking about are different laws or infrastructures in both different states in America as well as different countries that we've talked about. So just rounding it out, we've talked about tiered licensing, lane splitting, parking, tolls. Am I missing anything?
Just sheer joy because I'm very happy on my motorcycle, and generally, if I'm sitting in a car, I'm like whatever.
I don't know if that's a law or an infrastructure thing, but sheer joy is definitely it.
I
And that'll
think it's
take us right
important
on to
overall.
question 2, I suppose, there, Mr. Sheer Joy.
good segue. I like it.
So, we all know that regulations and laws can increase costs over time. So, what are some costs that affect motorcyclists or motorcycles from gaining popularity?
To do with municipal like laws and
just
enforcement?
like
or-
so think about like if ABS, for example, like if you have a law that says, well, ABS is now regulated, well,
I
that's going to
see.
drive the cost up. So
Yep.
Like
what
there is
is
in
it-
Europe right now, which is the reason we get so many bikes with ABS.
Yeah. So
Right.
so what are some of the costs that we're seeing that could prohibit people from getting into motorcycling?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, ABS is a good place to start, I suppose, because that's technology that trickles down to, everyone from the sort of upper echelon of motorcycling, but it does add cost. I mean, ABS is not a great example now, though, because it's what, $300-400 normally.
Yeah.
Premium.
Right.
But if we go,
If it's not already included.
like we've
Yep.
been to Thailand and Nepal and places where there's just like so many motorcycles, they're just so abundant. And part of the reason they're so prevalent is because they're so damn cheap. And the
Right.
reason they're so cheap is because they're simple. They're carbureted, they're single cylinder, they're air cooled, like unsealed chains, drum brakes, really rudimentary motorcycles.
Perfect. Yep. Perfect motorcycles.
Yeah, they're great. They're great bikes. We rode them in Mexico and they're awesome. These little Italicas, but that stuff is just not available in the U.S. Like your cheapest motorcycle is $2,000 or $2,500.
Because it's not cool.
And it's not
well, is
cool.
it not cool? But I think safety's become such a thing here.
Yeah,
you know,
and
you have
emissions
to be
and
safe.
technology that are required, like it has to be fuel injected. It's so rare to find carburetors anymore and disc brakes and just like all these little things like ABS that dial the
Right.
price up to the point where your bottom basement motorcycle is $2,500, which is obviously a little bit of an impediment to more people getting involved.
Well, I think emissions is a key. You kind of just like said it and moved on, but I think when you look at the cost that all these emissions technologies, I guess would be.
Yeah.
Technology-full motorcycle.
Yeah, technology
Yeah.
full. add to the motorcycle, I think that's definitely a prohibitive cost.
Yeah, it's a big one to get taken care of because like I did an interview with the guys that some of the engineers for the S1000RR, and they said after developing the engine, just the exhaust system alone takes the most man hours and effort and expense because not just to make power, but to get it to make power and pass all the emissions. So it's a huge time suck of resources to develop a pipe that's Euro 4 or Euro 5 compliant.
Yep.
And that obviously adds expense.
It's the same thing at Harley Davidson. I talked to a similar person in a similar position at Harley, and they spend tons of time on that. And of course, they are not hindered by looking for horsepower, as we know, but still takes up a lot of time to engineer the stuff to pass those tests.
You hear? Go ahead, Joe.
I just think about all of the components that go into a modern motorcycle now due to that. You know, all those laws, like you said, Euro 4, Euro 5, EFI.
Yeah.
Then you're also thinking about, okay, there's flapper valves and exhaust. The catalytic converter itself is really expensive. You know, all these O2 sensors. And then on top of ABS, you have to have a computer that can process all
Yeah.
that. Then
It's
you
all
have
expensive
rider
stuff.
modes. You know what I mean? So, like, it almost goes to the point where it's like, okay, we had to have this ABS and fuel injection because of the laws, but then we had to have intelligent ABS.
Stuff to back it up.
Yeah, like we have to have corner sensitive braking and IMUs and these flapper valves in the exhaust to make the most power and still meet. It's all these different things that start stacking up, and then it's almost like to the point where the manufacturer has to add on top of those existing requirements to sell the bike over the
They've got to
competition.
tweak it to make it unique and special and stand
Right.
out.
So
And the features do a lot for that, right?
Yeah.
So you can understand them not
So does-
producing a bike with points and a carburetor and drum brakes because.
But I mean,
they're
just less
deformed.
like I don't need you to answer this question because I've heard a little bit about what's in your garage. But like, would you guys be willing to have simpler, cheaper, less good motorcycles?
I love the ones that are in my garage that are simpler,
Me
cheaper,
too.
and
They make me really
less
happy.
technological.
Yeah.
So you guys are all you're talking about emissions, and you're all kind of dancing around everything except for the heart of what emissions is, and it's all goes back to the gasoline-powered, combustion engine.
Sure.
We hear so often gasoline costs. Like if gasoline costs go rocket ship high, then it's going to drive motorcycle sales. Do you believe that? Like, do you think that if gas prices get to a certain point, or is it just like no?
Scooters, mopeds.
Yeah, I mean, we have this conversation sometimes because gas prices in California are high, and so sometimes we wonder what it would look like if gas was.
Give us an example. Like
$10 a gallon or $20 a gallon.
We're $2.50, $2.60 a gallon right now in
Jeez.
Philadelphia.
They're
What do you
giving
guys
it
think?
away
I don't think
here.
it's ever been that. Not the entire time I lived in California has ever been.
It's
It's
like
like $4
4,
right now.
yeah.
Okay, so almost double.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we feel like if gas prices were more in line with what it is in Europe, where it's like a lot more expensive, say it was $8 or $10 a gallon, I think that would definitely push more people toward motorcycles. But it would also wreck the economy.
Yeah.
Like it would hurt a lot of people.
It would be a sign of bad things.
Yeah.
In general. So
I guess
it's like a
my
little bit more
question.
frustrating.
So when you think about that though, like the mom with 2 kids or the dad that's taking the kids to soccer practice in the morning, like
Yep.
is that really going to affect them? Are they going to run right out and buy a scooter, or buy a?
It's hard to say, but like those young people that are just getting their license or college students are working their first couple of jobs, like instead of getting a 6-cylinder car, they might get a 2-cylinder motorcycle that gets 60 miles per gallon.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like to think that would be the case anyway, but I think that there's arguably other places to go first, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like e-bicycles are super popular now, even
Yeah.
electric motorcycles, right?
But I think about how fuel efficient cars have become. So unless
Exactly.
unless you're buying
Totally.
like an NC 700X, which can get up to like 65, 70 miles to the gallon, like you could just buy a Honda Civic. I mean, the regular standard Civic that's not even a hybrid can get like 35 miles to the gallon.
But in the last gas price spike, I mean, I know in Los Angeles we saw more people on bicycles and more people on motorcycles. So like
Right.
whatever the cause is, when gas prices go
was
up,
that a spike and then it like
yeah.
immediately came back down?
Right.
'Cause I know I was in Nashville and we saw a spike in scooter sales,
Yep.
and then it just was like, okay,
Yep.
we're just gonna
it
go
was
back
just
to riding our
it was a
cars.
momentary blip, but
Yeah.
it got people thinking about it.
Yep.
Yeah, because I think the problem is that as soon as it gets to be like 98 degrees and the humidity's hitting, you're like, you know what? I just want to be in my air conditioned.
Well, yeah, and then
vehicle.
plus, the gas comes back down, and then people are like, well, I can, I've been spending this much on gas anyway. I might as well get a giant Escalade. Or
Might as well
whatever.
get a F-150.
right.
All right, so we need to get new riders. That's really what it comes down to, right? You need to get more people into this. So it's overcoming the barriers to entry. So, one of the barriers to entry is choosing and purchasing a first motorcycle if you have little to no experience. So the question is, what can change about the motorcycle buying experience to help new riders get into motorcycling?
Yeah. So this brings up dealership experiences.
Yeah,
And
better experiences at dealerships, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that would help. I think there are probably a lot of kind of devious old school used car salesman type motorcycle dealers out there that
Just looking to move bikes off the floor.
yeah, it could be. And I guess there are fewer in general, right? Mm-hmm. Motorcycle dealerships.
So they're out there and they're available, but I mean, I've had not great experiences with a lot of dealerships. So finding a good one is obviously critical, but that's going to be a huge resource. You've got people who supposedly know the models and the features and the benefits and have kind of an understanding of the ecosystem of motorcycling. So if you find a good one, they could be a huge resource for information and steering you toward your first bike.
How would you find a good one?
Word of mouth, or I mean, now you can use Yelp or Google. Just look it up.
Because I think that's the problem. Like we talked about this in previous episodes. Like word of mouth is really easy because like I know a bunch of motorcyclists.
Exactly, because we're already in the
Right.
sphere.
So if I
Yeah,
come
yeah,
to
yeah.
California, I'm
Yep.
like, hey, Zach, I'm looking for service for my KTM. Where would you recommend going? And, oh, here, go to Bob's.
Yeah.
Bob's has the best service in town. So like, I think for us that's pretty easy to say. But I think for somebody that's like, they're sitting at home, they've seen a motorcycle in a movie or a video. It's like,
Right.
well, now where do I start?
Yeah.
And look at the internet, right? Like the internet is one of those sources that can either be really helpful or it can scare the shit out of you.
Yeah,
Dude, it's
there's
so
a lot of
overwhelming.
information on there,
Yeah.
but there's information on both sides, right? You've got people who are telling you the truth, and you got to learn how to find them, and then you got people who are just talking out their and you
Is
gotta
there
figure out how to push them to the side.
is there structure in the automotive world that motorcycles can learn from? Are there things, right? I mean,
I mean, that dealership experience is usually better, but it's like it's a lower consequence when you're buying a car for some reason, even though they're more expensive and they're bigger and more complicated.
what do you mean lower consequence?
I don't know. Like motorcycles are so important. Like you could buy, I need to get to work, say I need to commute 20 miles. I can buy a Honda Civic or I can buy a Jeep Wrangler, and like it doesn't
Practically, it's the
doesn't
same.
really
Yeah,
make
right.
a difference,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Like
Yep.
whatever.
It depends
You're
on
gonna
what
have
you
the same
imagine
features.
you're going to do on the weekends with it, even
Yeah.
if you're not really.
Right.
Whereas with a motorcycle,
You buy the wrong one and it sucks.
yeah, you could buy a CRF 250L or you could buy a GSX-R 1000, and like those are not
Completely
like, those
different
are very
experience.
different
Right,
machines.
right.
Pictures aren't very good in the woods.
Not just in the woods, but think about like just
Not with
commuting.
that attitude.
Like if you were just getting back and forth to work, which one of those is going to be more comfortable?
Yeah,
Like
and
the
how do you know?
250L would be much more comfortable, but you don't know that.
Yep.
Because you don't know where to start.
So how do we get people to know that?
So I think that's a good question, and I'm asking the questions.
I think,
That's fair.
with everything now, obviously, folks are turning to the internet for all of their information. People, they I think, are just overwhelmed with all the different sources.
It's
of
easy to
information out there.
happen, yeah.
Videos, blogs, vlogs, whatever this, and it's like you get into this point where I've seen people do it with motorcycles or bicycles or musical instruments or computers or whatever. They're people work hard for the money. They want to be educated before they part with their cash. And it's just like, man, I don't have time to learn all this stuff. Like, I'm just going to skip it. You know
There's
what I mean?
too many
Like,
options.
Right. It's like, well, can I just go to the guy? Can I just go talk to a guy in the store and have him tell me what I should do? And
Right.
then it's like
Yep.
to maybe be fortunate enough to have, like, even we live in a super metropolitan area, and I could only probably name like 5 shops around here, that are within a half an hour of driving around. But I remember last year when we did the Do You Even Care episode that you mentioned in the beginning, there was a few comments from folks that are like, man, I live in Missouri, and like, there's nothing around anywhere. Like, I don't have rider groups to meet up with. Like, I don't know anyone. None of my friends or family are into it. Like, how would I even know what kind of bike I would be into, or how, So I think it's almost tougher now for folks because there's too much information. There's too many options.
Right, but the flip side to that is that the internet is so vast that you can go to Facebook and type in like motorcycle riding group, or you can like get on Instagram and you could like, send a message over to Ari or Zack or whoever you see like doing this shit on motorcycles in their garages or whatever and be like, hey, I'm really interested in this. Can you just help me? And there's so many people out there the internet's become a vast resource too. So while you do have diner syndrome where it's like, oh, I want to buy a new motorcycle and there's 17 dirt bikes to choose from, and this site says that 14 inches of suspension travel is not going to be enough for me. Like, meanwhile, you're out there on a vintage dirt bike with 5 inches of suspension travel. Like, I think that for me, stop it. I think that the internet, while it can be intimidating, it can also be a pretty inviting place and can make it easy for that kid in rural wherever to have access to some of that information that they might not otherwise have.
People like you and Joe and Zack and I in the past and currently who have intentionally, with experience and skill, tried to present information in a way that's easy to digest and is informed and hopefully helpful. So determining if the source of information you're using is a total jackwagon or someone who actually knows what they're talking about.
Exactly the word I was going to use.
It takes a little bit of critical thinking, right? But it's usually pretty easy to figure out pretty early on.
So bringing it back to the buying experience, right? Like we talked a little bit about the dealership model. You had said that you've had some bad experience with the dealerships. I've had some pretty good ones. Now, not to say
lucky you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Not to say that there's not some bad ones out there, because I agree with you. There's definitely been some bad experiences. But like, I think back to when I bought my first bike at a BMW Triumph shop up in Port Clinton called Hermes, and the salesman, like, he knew I'd never owned a bike before. He sat me down, he explained what a petcock was, explained how everything worked, and like talked about it. And then I went and took the MSF course, and I came back and he walked me through how to like my financing options, or how do you want to pay for this? And then like when I finally bought the bike, he like pushed it out back for me and let me ride it up and down the alley, and then guided me out front, and like it was for me, I lucked out. Yeah, but for me, like, that's how I got into it. Like I had a dad who would like take me around and like show me some stuff, but when it came time to buy, he wasn't very supportive of that. He was like, you just stick with college, son, and you don't need a motorcycle. You'll kill yourself. Like, it's like a BB gun. You'll shoot your eye out. So for me, I very much relied
showed
on
him.
You
really showed him.
Well, he was the first person I visited. I came back and I was like, hey, Dad, like I got this bike. And he got on it and he rode away. And at first I was like,
to get a pack of smokes.
Like, well, at first,
never saw him again.
No, at first I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, he likes it. And then I was like, like, can you return a motorcycle? Like, I had no idea.
Yeah,
I thought he was like driving it back to the dealership and like
That's right.
That's funny.
But he came back and he very much enjoyed it. But I think for me, the dealership experience was the learning experience that I needed at the time. To get into it.
I think to me it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, right? Like, you want one thing that car dealerships have going for them is that there are more, right? So good ones do well because they're good. Yeah. Bad ones don't do as well because they're bad. But if you live in Missouri or whatever, and there's one shop that's within 200 miles, then that's the place you're going to go.
Then they don't need to be good.
And they don't need to be good. And you even have that in major metropolitan areas, I think, because you can have a bad business, and if you just don't have repeat customers, it's okay because there's enough people,
right?
Which is a shame. But I think that there's potential to everyone in the motorcycling industry to learn from that, and I think it's a matter of people holding businesses accountable, and then the business is growing because they're good, and then therefore there are more people, and then there are more dealerships, and it's going to have to grow slowly like that, because one thing can't happen without the other.
So if you right now could look into the camera and tell someone, if there was someone watching this that had never purchased a motorcycle before, they're watching this and they're just excited to learn more about motorcycling and they might want to get into it, how would you recommend picking out a first bike? I don't care who goes first, but we're answering the question.
Send me an Instagram message, I guess, and I'll help you out.
So you're going to help the entire
He's
internet?
going to help all of the internet, all the motorcycles watching this show.
Find someone who has more information than you, wherever that may be, whether that's on the internet, hopefully in person, hopefully a local, an uncle, a friend, a neighbor, whatever. But someone that you can just like bounce ideas off of and have some guidance with. Because wandering into it on your own, you might have success, you might pick out a rad bike, you might do everything right, but you're probably going to have some stumbling blocks that would be easy to avoid if there was someone there to give you advice.
Yeah. What I come back to is just care about it. just care that you are making this big decision and you're moving forward with this thing. You have to ask yourself serious questions about what you want, and you have to make decisions, and you have to decide what information is good and what information is bad, and it's hard. But
Zach's saying, use your brain.
yeah, I mean, you gotta
It's
gotta
not very
buckle down.
common these days, but some people have to.
No, it's tough, and people have short attention spans, and
Yeah. You know, if you walk in and you're looking at motorcycles in a dealership, a lot of times those motorcycles are new. What are some of the advancements in motorcycling that can make purchasing a bike more appealing to potential buyers?
Safety is a big one, right? People know that motorcycles are dangerous because they are, but there's technologies that have come out that can make them safer. So
that was all that stuff we talked about before that makes it so expensive.
where we need to take it off the bike so they're cheaper.
Double-edged
Yeah,
sword,
right,
right?
We
What are you
want
gonna
it, but
do?
we don't want to pay for it.
I personally, I'm just gonna take this side. You don't need that stuff to start. I don't think you can.
But
like,
I want an IMU. I want 6-axis traction control. Because
that's
my
what John
first
Do you
bike.
Frank's
know?
got.
Do you know what 6-axis lean
All right,
sensitive
break it up.
ABS braking is when you're
No, but I want
fucking
it.
17 years
No,
old?
but if my first bike's gonna be an S1000RR, I need to have it.
Well, that's the wrong first bike. The dealership you've gone to is not giving
learning.
you the correct
Yeah.
information.
yeah.
He's
No, those
learning.
technologies, they're so advanced and so high level and so premium. That there should be they add expense. They need to be stripped down to some degree.
Name a technology outside of ABS that you would actually recommend to someone.
I love heated grips.
Okay,
But that's
That's
not
not a
gonna,
safety
that's
thing.
Not gonna, that's not going to advance motorcycling,
Well, if your hands
right?
are numb and you can't feel the controls, that's not very
this is
safe,
high
is
school
it?
debate
Temperature
here.
doesn't go below like 57 in California, so I don't.
I'll admit,
This is the guy that showed up to Philadelphia
you grew
dressed
up
like an
on the East
Eskimo.
Coast.
He's like, guys, I can't get out of
Yeah,
the car until you
he
open the
grew
door
up
for
on
me
the
so I can
East
run
Coast.
across the parking lot.
I will admit that heated grips are great. ABS, I think, is a genuinely important feature for
Cruise
someone
control.
riding. No, you don't need cruise control, man.
No, no.
In fact,
You
you should
think-
have to earn it. You should have to
Yeah.
ride across Kansas and back with no cruise control.
I like.
You don't
Zach's
need any
point.
of it.
ABS is very valuable. It is important. Thankfully, it's become quite cheap to get on motorcycles.
And prevalent.
But beyond that, it's a bunch of frivolous stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So there's nothing from a technology standpoint that you feel makes it easier for people to get into motorcycling.
Not
Electric start.
on the motorcycles.
Not-
but
not-
What? So give me an example.
Not-
helmet technology, airbag stuff.
that makes it easier to get people in. I mean, that's
Because it's
pretty
safer.
expensive.
Because
Honestly,
it is
so that
expensive.
makes it safer.
From an expense standpoint, that's why you don't need any of this stuff. You don't need, from an expense standpoint, you don't need ride modes. You don't need cruise control. You don't need traction control. You just need not very much horsepower and a nice bike to take you on an adventure and make sure that you will fall in love with this thing that is so great. Right?
What about?
Tell me I'm wrong.
Yes. No,
Try
you're
it.
right. I'm telling
He
you,
is
you're
right.
So okay, so it's I agree with you. I mean, I obviously started on a bike with nothing. I mean, it had a throttle, it had a brake, and you just went.
That's all you need, man. You don't even need the brakes, though.
Brakes just
You
slow you
don't
down.
need the brakes.
Don't need the
You want to
brakes.
go on record saying that. Look into the camera. Look into the camera and say it.
Well, I mean, if you're on a slow bike, then like the brakes are less important. And I think even like for ABS or any of the other technologies, like going back to the tiered licensing thing, if you're starting on a 150 or a 250 that only makes 18 or 20 horsepower, then like all of those other technologies are kind of unnecessary. And it gets you comfortable with threshold braking and how the bike handles and all that stuff before you even have to worry about needing those other technologies like traction control. You just don't need it when you don't have enough horsepower.
No, I agree with you, and I think that for me, my personal philosophy has always been that you should learn on a bike without ABS first, so that
Absolutely.
you can learn where those
Yeah.
those braking points come into play. I can see him out of the corner
Well,
of
you
my
need
eye.
to practice. You need to practice emergency threshold braking
but
at some point.
on a closed course situation.
Yes.
Like go to a parking lot and practice where that brake locks up and see where your limits are.
You can do that to a certain extent with ABS, though. Can you
Yep.
not?
You can. And
can.
you should.
You can.
If you
And
have
yeah,
a bike with
you should.
ABS,
You should
I'm
learn
gonna-
how. Yeah, you should learn how it feels.
Yeah.
And how
Well,
it
you
works.
should
learn
engage
how-
it. My dad did that when I was learning how to drive. He took me to a parking lot and he's like, I want you to brake as hard as you can so that you can feel what it feels like.
Right,
And I
so
did
you
that
don't
with my
just
wife
lift
when we were
off the
driving.
pedal.
Yeah, because it's like a
Yeah.
pulsing sensation and
Yeah.
it's doing weird things. But
Totally.
like, it's there to save your bacon, so you should be familiar with it.
Yeah.
And also, you'll be amazed at how hard you can brake before that ABS even kicks in.
Yeah,
Very true.
even crummy ABS
Yeah.
these days, which is pretty good. But I'm just imagining a situation where someone said, I'm going to get a small sport bike. I'm going to get an R3 or a Ninja 400 or something like that. Should I splurge on the $300 for ABS? I would just always say yes.
Yes.
Because
especially now because it's so cheap.
yeah, it's cheap and it's good, and I think it's a valuable thing, and it is a barrier of entry in so much as it costs more for motorcycling, but
It's also the most
It's worth
likely
it.
thing to save your.
yeah,
Right.
totally.
What about going beyond technology as an accessory item to an existing combustion engine motorcycle. What about some of the electric bicycles or electric bikes that we've seen come out? Do you see any value there in using electric vehicles, whether it's a bicycle or a motorcycle, as getting people into motorcycling?
Like gateway drug?
Gateway drug?
It's another way to get people on two wheels.
Yeah. And from that perspective, I'm for it. I think. I don't know how you guys feel, but
Well, I mean, talk to any motorcyclist that has a lot of experience with regular internal combustion engines and say, "Oh, you rode an electric motorcycle? What was it like?" And they're all like, "Pretty friggin' rad, man." Like I wanted to hate it because it doesn't make a cool sound, but it was really fun to ride.
Yep.
And in the same vein, really is like, I talk to other folks who have never ridden a motorcycle before. When I say, "Oh, well, an electric motorcycle, like, okay, it doesn't make all the noise that you hate. It doesn't have a clutch that you can't figure out if you don't already know how to operate a manual transmission, and it's just go and stop, And I think the simplicity of that, and also the fact that you could just plug it in when you get home,
Yeah,
so
the maintenance is so much lower.
Yeah, and there's like no moving parts really. It's just such a simple thing. So I think that
but the sensation is the same, and
yeah, you get
worthwhile.
your knees in the breeze, man.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I mean, we haven't even talked about maintenance, but you think about like maintenance on a motorcycle, and like you have to know a little bit more than just buying a car. I'm looking at you because like your Instagram channel is
There's
like
Johnny maintenance
let
over
me
there.
tell you how to like you just do it for fun. Like it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. You're out there just making another video about cleaning a chain.
I like working on that stuff.
But like, what about maintenance? Are there certain things with new motorcycles that are easier to maintain than buying something that's like 10, 15 years old? Is that a consideration?
Well, for starters, people should know that if you're switching from cars to motorcycles, there's going to be more maintenance. They burn through tires faster. They burn through chains and sprockets. They burn through brake pads. Basically, all the consumables are consumed faster on two wheels than four. But those parts are typically cheaper, not really when it comes to tires, unfortunately. But that's a reality. And I mean, if you can go to an electric bike and you can have less maintenance, that's an appealing factor for people because they can get on two wheels and have those benefits without having to worry about oil to change or all the other parts that they might need to tune up or replace. But there's no getting away from it. Like motorcycles take more work.
I think that's an attractive facet of it, though. To your point, I think that e-bikes having less maintenance could be a reason for people being interested in it. They are expensive though, in general, which is I think where the e-bicycle thing comes in, and everyone's gonna have their own opinion about whether or not that's good for motorcycling. But as we said, I think it gets people on two wheels,
and it teaches them the basic skills of balancing and turning. So then they're like, oh well, like whenever I teach someone to ride a motorcycle, the first thing I ask them is, do you know how to ride a bicycle? Because that's a prerequisite.
A great first question.
Yeah. If you know how to ride a bicycle,
it's the first question in the MSF program. Like, do you know how to ride a bicycle? It's like the first like little box you have to check off.
So if e-bikes are getting more people on two wheels on bicycles, whether it's on bike trails or mountain bike trails or whatever, then I think it is good for motorcycling because then they already have the fundamental skills needed to ride a motorcycle.
I was just thinking pre-electric motorcycle talk when you're talking about technology.
Let me guess. Joe wants to talk about old bikes.
Talk about something
No,
old.
I mean I just think that
Let's go back to points ignitions.
I think that
They're so cheap to replace.
all the bikes now basically have EFI and have electric start. And considering most of my old bikes are kick start with a carburetor that you got to tickle or choke and all that, like that's a way bigger barrier to entry.
You're out there tickling and choking.
Sounds like a weird relationship, man.
Oh man. Really, this is a family-friendly program.
But I just think that the bikes that I grew up on compared to the ones that are available now for a new rider, the ones now are so easy to use, man. You just go out, turn the key, hit the button, no matter what the temperature
They're ultra
is.
reliable. They might be more complicated and harder to work on, but they just don't break.
They don't break.
Yeah, there's a lot less work that needs to be done unless you really do something bad, outside of regular maintenance.
Yeah.
The one thing that I don't think we hit on, but you dabbled on it briefly when you're talking about electric motorcycles, is someone not knowing how to use a clutch or shift.
Yeah.
I mean, so many cars, it's so hard to find a car with a manual transmission.
Standard
So when you
anymore.
look at electric bikes as far as having an automatic transmission, you look at what Honda's doing with their DCT transmissions. And I remember I brought it up in a previous episode, but I was talking to Colin over at Honda, and he was like, yeah, like most of the Gold Wings we're selling are the DCT transmissions. Because you get on, you flip the switch, and you just you ride it. You
can drink your Starbucks while you're jamming down the highway.
Also, I got the arthritis in my left arm.
Well, I think when you look at the fact that like Honda's introduced that DCT, and for those of you that are watching that aren't familiar, it's dual clutch transmission. It basically works like an automatic transmission. It's not an automatic transmission. I you can't say that, but it works like an automatic transmission.
Right.
Where you
It
just
feels
fully
like a
throttle
car.
in.
It feels like a car.
Practically,
with
it's an
automatic.
automatic.
Twist and go. You don't have to shift if you don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at the way that Honda's introduced that in some of their more affordable bikes, some of their lower tiered bikes, I think something like that makes it more approachable. It goes back to talking about scooters. The ease of entry and getting onto a scooter or a bicycle.
Big
that's an
fan of
electric
scooters.
bike.
Scooters are great.
Scooters are great.
They are
Scooters are
really.
great. Yeah.
They're so easy to use.
I have a
Great way
question.
to get around.
What was the question again?
Let's go back and we'll round this one out because we pretty much answered it. But
Good
we'll
thinking.
go, yeah. So, what are some of the advancements in motorcycling that can make purchasing a bike more appealing to potential buyers?
Like
So,
a standardized test.
Automatic transmissions, cheap ABS.
Fuel injection with electric start.
Yeah,
Which is
that's
something I
already
think we
here.
overlook.
That's all here.
But I
Yeah.
mean, we overlook that one a lot. But I think that's a good point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like you can get an SR 400 with kickstart, and that's about it.
I think they discontinued that bike. I don't think you can get that one
You can buy
anymore.
it used.
You're kidding. Anyway, the thing is, I think we should tell people that you don't need certain things, right? There are advancements, but don't be sold too heavily into them. That would be the thing that I would like everyone to leave with, because there are things that are good. Cheap ABS is good. Electric start is good. Electric bikes can be good. Automatic transmissions can be good, but
Don't need it.
You don't need it. The basic motorcycle will
Hop on whatever
Yeah.
bike you find in the Trading Times and go hammer down to your local restaurant and have yourself a good night.
You're like trailing off there, man. Oh, man. Hammer down to your local restaurant. Okay, so you don't need all the technology to go out and have a good time. Final question, and we're going to kind of break this down into 3 parts. This is going to be a 3-parter. So do we, and that's the royal we, that's you out there, that's us on the couch, do we even want motorcycling to take the next step, to grow, to become more popular?
Whoa,
and if
turning
we,
it around
and if we
on
do, why do we want it to? And I want to start by talking about just the overall community, not necessarily motorcycling community, but like we were talking about lane splitting earlier. We're talking about
Yeah.
like the overall community of cars and motorcycles and people all getting along in harmony, cats and dogs, all of that.
Kumbaya.
Yeah. So, part 1, do we want motorcycling to take the next step and grow for the overall community? And if so, why?
So this is like, are you suggesting that some people
ready.
might not want that to happen?
Yeah. There
'Cause
might be
like-
some people that like don't want people to get into it.
Right, because like if everyone's got a motorcycle, then nobody does, and it's not cool anymore.
Yeah.
What? No,
That's
I mean,
crazy talk.
It is crazy talk. Thank you.
I don't believe it, but I'm sure that there's somebody out there watching that's like, man, I want
is that?
less people getting into motorcycles.
the more the merrier. And I will posit this: motorcyclists in general are better on the road. They're more skilled operators of vehicles because Darwin weeds out the shitty ones. And you can drive. You can drive a car. You can drive a car and be
You're
a pretty
also better
terrible
looking.
driver, and you're safe. So like, the safety issue aside, motorcyclists are more attentive because it's really hard to text and ride. Unless you're on a scooter, and you just have to be paying
Not
attention.
that you should do it
Not that you
if
should
you're
do
on
it,
a scooter.
or like Snapchat and ride or any of that
Yeah.
stuff. But anyway, motorcycles have to pay attention. They're more attentive. They're more spatially aware because if they do anything wrong, they might get hurt. And I think the more people that ride, the safer the roads will be.
I've become a better driver since I've become
Yes.
a motorcyclist. Like
I
being a
agree.
motorcyclist has made me a better driver.
I actually don't know what that's like, but I can see how that would be the case.
Yes.
You don't know what driving a
I think
car
it's
is like?
irrefutable.
Well, I learned to
though.
ride a motorcycle before I learned how to drive a car. So, but the point is, that's a good anecdote.
So
and I
the-
think that a lot of people would be in that same
Yeah,
situation.
the more the merrier because the roads will be safer.
Plus, as we've learned with sort of the California anecdote that Ari and I were talking about earlier, people will become more accepting when there are more of them and are more likely to understand
Yep.
the sort of nuance of motorcycling, the reason that people enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is that
think-
like just seeing more motorcycles on the road
Yeah.
get people
Yeah.
more aware of them?
Right, and we noticed that because obviously out here on the East Coast where we are, Philadelphia area, it's seasonal riding for the most part. So I find
must
that
suck.
in the winter time or
You said it with such a straight face too.
Hey man, I grew up in
He's not-
Massachusetts.
he's not
I spent,
kidding.
I spent 21 years dealing with the winters.
I just think that I feel way more in danger in the riding, the time of the year that there's not many other bikes on the road because people just aren't thinking any
Sure.
bikes are out there. You know what
Sure.
I mean? So I always feel cars are more prone to pull out in front of me or make left turns in front of me or come into my lane when it's not summertime and they're seeing a bike every other block or every mile or something like that. So
And you want other people out there flying the flag with you.
yeah, exactly, man.
And more
Help out
riders.
your friend Joe, guys.
Come on. No, I feel the same way. I think that for me, anytime that there's more bikes on the road, it's just better for everybody. Because you talk about the overall community, more bikes on the road means that there's more motorcycle sales. There's more dealerships that are available for
the industry will do
selection.
better.
Yeah, I think
bikes will become cheaper. You'll have more
the whole
knowledge
thing.
base.
Yeah, it helps out. It helps out everything. So I think for me, yes, and why? Because it makes it better for all of us. I mean, for those of us that are already enthusiasts, it's going to make everybody more aware. It's going to improve the infrastructure of motorcycling in general. And for people that aren't already into it, I think it's going to make it easier to get into it. Part two of the question. Part two of the question is: do you want motorcycling to take the next step and grow? If so, why? For the motorcycle community. So this is motorcycle community specific, not the good of all, but just
global.
Us.
Okay.
Us as existing motorcycles. Do we want motorcycling to grow and become more popular?
I think I'll play the bad guy again. I think there's a potential downside, which is that in places where there are lots and lots and lots and lots of two-wheeled vehicles, you oftentimes see less diversity in them, right? So is it possible that motorcycles would grow to such an extent that it's just like, well, motorcycle manufacturers aren't going to spend the
less
money
choice.
to do. Yeah, less choice. You're just kind of like, you can get this one or that one, and none of it's very interesting, but there you go. That's your lot.
Or you saw like with Harley Davidson, back in the 90s, the early 2000s, where you had to like go and like there was nothing on the dealership floor. You had to like special order one if you wanted one. Like it made it much harder to just go and enjoy the experience of a dealership.
Yeah, which would I suppose could limit the number of people. I myself, I'd be willing to ride something cheap and boring and dumb because I love it too much not to.
Do you not ride something cheap
lots
and
of cheap.
boring dumb? I've seen that scooter you ride around on.
They're cheap and dumb, but they're not boring.
Yeah.
Two wheels is never boring.
But I think this discussion is the same for me as it is for everyone in the world. Within the motorcycling world, it would just be better to have more people because you have more diversity and you have more
people
influx
to
of money
ride
in.
with, but that could also be another double-edged sword, right? Like
Ah,
some people
true.
get on motorcycles on the weekend to get away from their families or responsibilities or whatever. And if you've got a family that everyone rides, then you have to pack up the whole family and go out to the
And
desert.
you can't escape that.
Like, I don't think that's a bad thing. That sounds great, but somebody out there might be like, no, you know what? I really don't want the wife and kids to like get into off-road or whatever.
So if your wife was like, you're falling asleep and she's like, do you think Marquez can wrap up the championship this weekend? Like, would you be like, oh, just let me
I'd be like,
sleep?
of course he's gonna.
or would you be like,
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm excited to have this conversation.
I don't know. Right now, it's exciting to think about, but who knows? You're right. Maybe it'll be like, oh, this is enough.
Fair
I
enough.
think it could go one way or the other, considering the fact that when you talk to non-motorcyclists and their view of us, the first thing they think of is all the negative stuff. The
Sure,
one bad apple spoils the bunch, where the
the beards and the tattoos and the so on. Don't get me
that.
started.
Loud motorcycle.
Don't even get me started on that.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is just ruining it for everyone. But on the flip side, there could be, if motorcycling really grew, it could, maybe that impression could change.
Because we could dilute the bad apples with
right,
good
exactly.
apples.
We could have a lot more good apples,
Yeah.
and then people would be more into
So-
it, and then work on all the other stuff we
Yeah.
talked
A
about.
little PSA here, then. All of you existing motorcyclists, try and set a good example for the general
right.
public
Be
and
a
for
good
other
apple.
riders out there. I've definitely, when that Jack wagon's splitting lanes on his R1,
Yeah.
bounced off the rev limiter, and the cars move over, when I go by, I'm literally I try and
Right.
gesticulate.
I don't
and be
know
like, I'm
him.
sorry.
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
For him.
I'm
Yeah.
apologizing
Yeah.
for him. We're not all like that.
Yeah.
So, it's an
Yeah.
important
I've been
distinction
there.
to obviously, we have a lot of freedoms on the road, and our bikes can go fast, and they can do all sorts of stuff, but, we got to...
Let's
Yeah.
make the T-shirt. Let's make the bumper sticker. Be a good apple.
Right.
Be a good apple.
Be
Look
a
at
good
this.
apple, guys.
We can
Available
make that
on
happen.
RevZilla.com next week.
$35 a T-shirt.
My gut reaction to this is of course, more motorcyclists is going to be good for us as motorcyclists. The one thing, as you guys were talking, you mentioned very briefly, well, maybe there's the guy that doesn't want to take his whole family out to the desert to go ride. There's a pretty big distinction with off-road riding, West Coast versus East Coast. There's so much public use land that you guys have out there in California where you can go and you can just ride. In Pennsylvania and New Jersey, we have to be pretty selective in where we can go and ride our off-road bikes. And Joe and I obviously talk a lot about going to ride KTMs. But when I think specifically about going to
Are
ride,
you guys fond of the color orange or something?
going to ride in New Jersey, one of the things that we can get away with is there's a lot of really cool places to ride in the Pine Barrens, and as long as
If
you're
you have a plate.
respectful and you have a license plate,
Yeah.
you can go and you can go ride. But I think if that number were to double or quadruple, now all of a
I
sudden,
was thinking the same thing about track days.
Yeah.
They're just going to fill up.
Right.
well, they're going to fill. First of all, they're going to fill up, and then the costs are going to go up. It's going to become more expensive for you to go because they're going to raise the cost.
Economy of scale. Right now, there's 5 track days a month, say in California, and if there was more and more people, then obviously that number of providers is going to go up. But at some point, you're still going to reach a saturation where you have to like, it's a lottery to get a ticket to
And
go to a track day.
I assume where you're going with it is that trails might close, people get
That's
sick
what-
of it.
so that's
Or they
what
just
I'm
get
afraid of.
crowded.
I'm afraid, like, so we're out there right now, and if the family out there riding horseback through the forest, sees 1 or 2 motorcycles a day, they're like,
no big
oh,
deal.
I can live with that. But
Yeah.
if it's like they're out there trying to have a picnic and go fishing in the lake, and all of a sudden it's just like dirt bikes whizzing by them, whether they have a plate or not. Like,
Yeah.
Well, think
now all
about
of a
this
sudden-
though. Think about when we saw the trails out where they are. You have to buy your pass, and you're allowed to ride certain trails, based on certain times of the year or whatever. So if the off-road community grew around here to the point where, maybe the whatever Wharton State Forest would sell a trail use pass, and all these motorcycles would kick down $100 a year for a trail use pass that could have designated trails that were maintained by the state that didn't have horses on
So
them.
now you're driving costs up for motorcycling. So like, I agree with you. I
Not to
would
mention for the government.
that's
But,
what
like,
I'm worried about the government.
When we were in Utah, there was a similar situation.
Yeah.
We filmed out there last year, and they have like 3,000 miles of public
Idaho.
use.
Wow.
Yeah, did I say Utah?
Just
I meant
to be clear.
Idaho. They're close. But like the registration, which is pretty affordable, it's $17 a year.
Yeah.
It goes to pay for the trails. They're
That's
all
awesome.
maintained. So
Yeah.
it's just like this symbiotic relationship of like riders contributing to the
Yeah.
trail maintenance, and that allows them to have all that.
When I was
Synergy.
I was in Utah. I did Moab and then I
Idaho?
did Colorado. No, different
Actually,
state.
Utah?
Different
Okay,
state. I was in Utah, and in Utah, if you have a Pennsylvania license plate, you can ride all the trail systems in Utah for free without buying the pass.
Why?
But then because it's reciprocity, they have
Huh.
like they're shared states.
Interesting.
But then when I
Pennsylvania's
went
got
to
a lot going on.
But when I went to Colorado, you had to buy the pass. And like we all went down, and I think it was like, $20, $30 or something like that. But I would very much be okay with that. If they opened up all the state forests in Pennsylvania and I had to spend like $100 for an annual pass, I would very much do that.
Yeah, because you want to contribute.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that one of the downsides here for how more motorcycling could potentially have a negative influence would be when we look at, we're already
Overuse.
trying to fight for trail use. We're
Yeah.
already trying to fight to
Sure.
maintain and keep these trails
And if
open.
there's twice as many bikes chewing up the trails, and they might be like, we have to close them.
Or
to
10
let them-
times as many.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or,
So-
or maybe because there's so many more motorcyclists doing it, and this is my own counter. I like to counterpoint my own point sometimes, but like maybe because there's so many people doing it, like now all of a sudden there is more of a force to fight for it in government. There's more of a force to fight for opening more trails. So I guess it could work either way.
Would you,
What up?
Spurg and Dunbar, king of the cards, would you give up some of your trails? Would you give up 75% of the trails that you ride on to see 75% more motorcycles at every stoplight in the city, or
Oh, come on.
riding
That's
across?
easy. That's a good rate of return.
It doesn't look like he would, ladies and
No.
gentlemen. For
I
those who
knew-
listen to the
I-
podcast, he's
selfish
grimacing. He
bastard.
doesn't know.
As soon as you started asking this question, I knew where it was going. I was like, don't ask me this.
It's tough.
Don't
It's tough.
let us
Don't ask
down
me
here,
this.
Spurgeon.
It's tough.
Come
It's tough.
on, man.
If you want me to bail you out, do you want me to bail you out?
What's my bailout?
75% more bikes on the road.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
That means
I
RevZilla
think-
would do a lot more bids.
Oh
and
my- okay,
maybe,
let's
maybe
do
we
it.
get
Now
a-
you're just trying to
maybe
guarantee
we get a
my
nice
job,
Christmas
right?
bonus.
So I think to your point about the government maybe, or there being more municipal force moving toward legal riding areas and that kind of thing, because it would be a bigger deal in society. I think that could have potentially. So what I'm saying is 75% of the trails are closing, 75% more people on the road riding motorcycles, enjoying them. But you have to wait 10 years for society to acclimate and to
This
get your trails
question is
back.
really growing. This is
It's
like,
getting real complicated.
This is why you don't get to hold the cards.
I want to know if you're willing to sacrifice some of the things that you love for the greater good.
I feel like I have to say
You
yes.
have to say yes, because
I have to
otherwise
say
I'm going
yes.
to be really disappointed in
I have to
you.
say yes.
But part of
Yeah.
you says no, right?
There's other things you can get into with motorcycling.
Part of me
Start
part
drag
of me has a
racing or
hard
something.
because we
guy.
got no but so part of me has such
loves
a
his
hard
trails.
time saying like we barely have any trails here to ride as it is. Like Joe knows what I'm talking about. You guys
So you guys are just doing like
We'll
a
just
3-mile
move to
loop
Idaho.
over and over again?
we have
Yeah, pretty much.
we have a couple hundred
shoot.
miles of trails in New Jersey, and we have one state forest in Pennsylvania that we can ride before we get onto the private land. I would say yes. I would say if it means that we're going to have more people out there doing this and it becomes more inclusive and more exciting for everybody, for the motorcycle community, and eventually maybe that means a bigger, stronger force to fight for
Down the
land
road.
rights, to
Yep.
fight for lane splitting,
Sure.
then yes, I would say I will do that.
Well,
Greater
that's
good.
good to
And
hear,
then, and then
Spurgeon.
all of the gear that they can buy from RevZilla.com costs more money. I can go buy my own farm,
Yeah, you can
and
buy
I can
your
just
own
go
private
ride
land
my
and
own.
not worry
yeah.
about any of that
I
crap.
don't
Now
need
you're
any of
talking.
them. Yeah.
Now you're talking. That's
So
good.
the last part of this category is how would motorcycling growing or becoming more popular affect you? And is that something that you would appreciate?
Looks like you're up. No, he's looking at you. And you were taking a deep breath, so I assume you were ready to talk.
But that's because I will always talk, no matter what the scenario is. Yeah, I think that if it came down to it, I would be willing to make sacrifices if necessary. Like, I'd be willing to ride less interesting, slower motorcycles if it meant there were more people on the road, because I actually just love two-wheel. I can ride a lawnmower motor with no suspension and have a great time. So I would do that. But I like to think, to more directly answer your question, that when motorcycling grew, it would be in a sort of just in a linear way. Everything would get
it'd be a rising tide,
bigger and more expansive. Yeah, and I don't know exactly how it would affect me personally, but I like the idea of having more conversations with people in any situation about bikes and about why they're good, why they're fun, why they're maybe even practical one day.
So the example you threw out in the very beginning of the individual who wants it to be an exclusive club because they want to feel like they're really special and they're doing something that nobody else does, that's not you.
It's not me. I will admit to having ridden that wave, though. I think we probably all have. I mean, you've been the person.
You're like the only kid in high school who
had, like, he races motorcycles, he rides motorcycles, and people from every walk of life are kind of like, whoa, wow, that's interesting. He must be an interesting fellow. He must have a lot of courage and also be very good looking.
And they meet you and they're like, oh my God, he is.
Right. So I think that we have all probably benefited from that aspect of, society has decided from however you want to couch it, that motorcycles are cool in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, they're unique.
Yeah. They're
Instead of commonplace, which is what the question is, right?
And I think that we've all probably benefited from that in some situation or another, but I would definitely give that up because it doesn't matter to me. I definitely don't, like, Ari and I talk about this all the time. We wear an aero stitch, we wear modular helmets. We do not ride motorcycles because they're cool.
We are big dorks.
We ride them because of the feeling we get when we ride them, the satisfaction of controlling the machine, being in the environment more than you are in a car, all the same old stuff.
And as you said, the practicality.
Yeah, I mean, they are practical. In California, their motorcycles are actually practical in some scenarios. But we need to remember, of course, being Californians, that
there's a whole world out there.
Yeah, I mean, my dad lives in Vermont, where I grew up, and he often reminds me, I do not ride motorcycles because they are practical, man. Like, they're a pain in my tail for 5 months out of the year when I have to store them, and then I have to get them running in the spring, and I can't split lanes, not that you'd want to in Vermont anyway. Right. But he only does it because he loves it. Yeah. It doesn't do him any good. It never makes sense to go to the store on a motorcycle, ever.
Well,
but he does it.
Elevating it from a recreation to a commonplace everyday thing is the big struggle, right? And that's you go to places in Europe, and as we've discussed, Southeast Asia, where the population is so high that it demands that people are on motorcycles because there isn't room for cars, and because the economy doesn't support people buying cars. And that's obviously not a turn we want for America, but it's an example of how motorcycles become so prevalent in places like that.
And it's an example of how they can help a city tick.
Absolutely.
Like in urban environments, it's an example of how single track mobility
think how many more
better.
People you can get in a given lane.
But you're getting away from the question. This question is about you personally. So he's already kind of given me an answer that I'm okay with. I'll let your answer pass. But I still
he's a question overlord.
I would go so far as to give myself a permanent displacement cap.
You would?
Yeah.
Nice.
I would draw it at 500 cc's. I don't need to ride anything
That's a
bigger.
big bike. Come on now.
Compared,
well, how old are you?
Also,
Back in my day.
didn't Triumph just come out with a 2300 cc motorcycle?
Yeah. It's the same displacement as my Mazda 3 hatchback that I was driving around for years.
So I think, like, if we're supposed to be making sacrifices here for the greater good of motorcycling, I think that would be one. I would be willing to do that. If that means by taking a displacement, all that extra displacement that's out there is going to get chopped up into littler motorcycles and be out there for other people to ride. Sounds good to me.
Joe?
I like that.
Before we jumped in here, full disclosure, we were out to lunch. We were having a pretty motorcycle existential conversation.
It was heated.
Fortunately, obviously, all of us are lucky enough to have motorcycles be our livelihood, in addition to our passion. Not many people are lucky enough to do that, and I'm forever grateful for that fact. If motorcycling grew to a point where it was more common, blew up more than ever, and the fact that I knew in the back of my mind that I could do motorcycle stuff for a living for the rest of my life until I retire, even with, a comparatively lower pay or whatever compared to a normal job, desk
air
job.
Quotes. Joe's doing air quotes right now for those of you listening on the podcast.
A normal job that might pay better or be a little bit more secure. Yeah, man, I think hands down, like we've all made sacrifices, of course, to work in the motorcycle industry and try to get by. But man, just that sheer fact that if I knew for sure I could spend the rest of my life fooling with motorcycles after work, talking about them all day at work, racing them and riding them on the weekends and all that, I would be totally set.
So wait, what would you be giving up in this equation?
Yeah.
Because you just painted like a pretty rosy picture of your future.
This utopia.
Yeah.
Well, it's all that cool factor stuff. You know what I mean? Like,
It becomes
So you'd be-
commonplace,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm not concerned at all with
But you're not
being
that cool to
unique and
begin
cool.
with.
no, I'm
you
not
get
that
tats,
cool.
man.
Ouch.
I'm not cool at all. I'm the first to admit I'm totally not cool. But there's certain aspects about motorcycling that are very cool. And like we had talked about before, I'm reading that Malcolm Smith autobiography.
Yeah.
One of the coolest dudes ever made.
Yeah.
Quite literally.
One of the toughest dudes
Yep.
ever made. Like that generation of riders, especially Southern California riders who desert race and got into dune buggies and went to Mexico and all that stuff in the 60s and 70s. Like, those are the toughest, coolest dudes ever. It's sad to ever think that like maybe that's just not a thing anymore. Like we put all of the common racers, enduro or road racing or whatever racers on a pedestal at this point. Like, do we sacrifice motorsports?
But what do you think made him?
No, surely not. No, I mean, think about how popular basketball is, but there's still LeBron James and
Right? I want to talk about motorcycles.
Yeah.
I like
I'm
the
not
ball
walking. I'm
sports.
not walking down that road with sports ball. But think about what made him. Think about what made Malcolm Smith so cool, and it was his passion. It was the fact that he found something that he was just so passionate about. And like I read that book, it was fantastic. But it was all about the passion that he had
Right.
for just diving into something he didn't understand and like trying to rebuild something and learning how to do it, and then going out and just riding around in the hills and figuring out how to become better. And that to me is what makes motorcycling cool. And that's what's so great about all this is just the passion that you have. And obviously everybody on this couch has passion for this, and everybody spending an hour of your day watching this must have some passion. Otherwise you're just a masochist and we don't understand what you're doing with yourself. So
I apologize.
I mean,
for this.
for us,
but that's a good tie-up, a good call to action for people, right?
I could not agree with you more. This actually wraps up not just the episode, but it wraps up all of season 2, and it's been a great season. We've done a lot of cool new stuff. We've grown the audience to a much larger level, and we've had a absolute blast doing it. So from the bottom of my heart, I just want to thank everyone who has stuck with us through this whole experiment as we've continued to grow it and make it a little bit better.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce what Spurgy said. I really appreciate everybody checking out our videos and also our podcast. If you haven't checked out the podcast yet, just make sure you go to wherever you usually get your podcast and type in RevZilla. Then you'll see the High Side, Low Side podcast where we interview interesting dudes like these guys. And we also go through the viewer comments and things like that. So it's a lot of extra stuff in there for you to check out if you want to go check that out.
And speaking of these interesting dudes, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us, not just for this episode, but a couple episodes this season.
Yeah, man, for sure. I mean, I know it took a lot to make this finally happen, but I'm glad we got to do it. It's been a lot of fun, and obviously it's been an honor to contribute.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
Cool. So hopefully we can see what happens for season 3, but for that, we need some input from you guys. Everybody on this couch is content creators in the motorcycle sphere. We write articles, we make videos, and we rely a lot on audience feedback to see what you folks are looking for. So whether it's maybe something in the motorcycle world that can make motorcycling better that you feel that we just didn't hit on in this episode, and you want to throw an opinion down in the comment section, we'd love to hear that. If you have some ideas for season 3, throw them down there as well. We're always interested to hear what your feedback is for us. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. For everyone on the couch, Ari Henning, Bearded Joe, Zack Quartz on my left-hand side, I'm Spurg. Enjoy the ride.